Hello everybody, this is International Master Jesse Kraai, coming to you today from the East Bay Chess Club in Berkeley, California, where I'm playing in a big open tournament with some very strong players. And today I want to look at a game that I played yesterday against Yermolinsky. And this is probably the most complicated game I can remember playing, at least in recent history. And what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to share with you some of my general impressions of the game. And what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to present a lot of computer analysis of the game. I'm sure that's possible, and if people are interested, I could do that at a later point on this game. But the computer analysis, I think, wouldn't really grasp what was going on in the game, because in the game, a lot more human things are going on than a computer would be able to comprehend. Okay, so let's take a look at what happened. I played knight f3. My opponent is Yermolinsky, one of the strongest players around. And I have a lot of respect for him. He's a friend of mine, and a very dangerous opponent. And this is actually the first time I ever beat him, so it's very nice. Knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, d5. And here, I should say, I think I made a bad decision from a practical point of view. Because what's happening here is he's actually following a game that I played the day before against John Fedorovich. And in that game, we had the same variation, and he had clearly prepared. So because he had prepared, I probably should not have gone into it. I was very naive, kind of thinking, well, I'll just play what I think are the best moves. But really, when you can feel that someone's prepared for you, it's almost always a bad practical decision. So in any case, if I hadn't made the bad practical decision, we wouldn't have had an interesting game. I took queen a4, bishop d7 forced, queen c2, and let's go back and move. I actually covered a game earlier that I played against Handiger, where my opponent in that game played c6, and after queen d4, white got a very nice position, and that's covered in a different lecture. So bishop d7, the most critical move, queen c2. So the point of this move is that if black plays a natural move, knight b6, I can just play like d4 and e4, and I'll have a nice position. So in the past, I've played many different moves in this position. I've played queen b3, and then after knight b6, what's going to happen is the queen's going to end up losing a tempo, either via a5 or in a4, or via bishop e6. So if I can go queen c2, and then he's forced to play knight b6, that's an improvement upon his queen b3 move. The other move I've tried, actually against Yermo himself, is queen h4. And so the idea is that on h4, white can hope to get some kind of pressure against the black king side. And what's funny about this prior game is that in that game I kind of tried what seemed to be a premature attack, and that game ended up getting printed in the New York Times and Robert Burns' column under the title "Itchy Trigger Finger Draws Rapid Return Fire," and I think that was in 2001. And that was published in the New York Times, annotated by Robert Burns. And it's funny because in this game, I also lacked in a very strong degree in terms of my development. So it was a repeat performance, and I would recommend looking that game up. Maybe at some point I can even cover it. So anyways, there's a bunch of different moves here that one can try. I played queen c2. Yermo played the most critical, knight b4, queen b3, c5, and now I played knight e4. Now, unfortunately, this was kind of the end of my analysis. I had looked at this with a computer, and I had thought, well, life's just a little bit better. There's a position with reverse colors in the English where it's a similar position, and just on the basis of that, where here it seems like I have an extra tempo, I thought I had to have some kind of advantage here. The problem is that Yermo's move is very strong, and I didn't really appreciate it in my preparation. queen a5. And this move has actually been played before. It does a lot of things, queen a5. Three things in particular. So now if I ever play a3, I'm not actually threatening to take the knight because the queen's pinning the pawn to the rook. Also, it makes it very difficult for me to develop my queen pawn to d3 because of this check onto the king. And third, it's also threatening bishop a4, which is just an incredible threat because then my queen has to move and then knight c2 and then king d1 and then I can even take the rook with a check. So it just looks awful. In the prior round, Fedorovich played bishop f5, b3, takes, queen b6, but after queen c3, I had a nice position. And that game actually went on to be a draw, but I've analyzed that and very interesting. I should have had at least a slight advantage. Okay, so you can imagine after queen a5, I was a little bit terrified. And here, it's kind of interesting because here I'm forced to take immediate action. If I don't do anything, I'm going to be in big trouble. So I played this move, which it turns out has been played at least twice before. Okay, so I'm attacking something, but at the same time, I'm really not developing at all. Okay, this is a very interesting position. And here, I spent a lot of time before I played knight fg5 on black playing bishop a4. And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure what's going on here at all. Queen takes f7, king d8, and then a move maybe like f3 or f4, and I don't know what's happening. Maybe I'm winning, maybe black can survive. But I couldn't tell you. But clearly I'd spent a lot of time on that, and Yermo as well thought that it would be easier just simply to keep on developing. And from a human perspective, that makes a lot more sense. You keep on developing, and sure, I win a pawn and make the king move, but black is up so much more time that it seems like he should be winning. Now, here is the point where I play the novelty, which to me it just seemed like it was something I had to do. But on the other hand, I can understand why it was a novelty, because it seems simply suicidal. I played queen takes f7, king d8. And now the problem is, well, I have to come back, queen c4. The problem is, just optically when we look at this position, that white has absolutely no development at all. And all of black's pieces are going to be ready to come out soon. The bishop's going to come to g7. Having taken the f-pawn, his rook can even come to f8. The other rook will be able to come to the center as well. In the meantime, both of my rooks aren't playing, my bishops aren't playing, and not only that, but for each bishop I want to develop, I have to invest at least one pawn move. So I'm down an incredible amount of time, and the fact that his king has moved doesn't seem like it's really that big of a deal. So this is a very interesting position from a discussion of chess principles in general, because my instinct here was that I was in big trouble. And it turns out that, in fact, maybe I'm better here, which is very surprising to me even now. My chess principles would still like to suggest that I'm losing here, I'm in big trouble, but in fact, maybe I'm okay. The way I'm playing in the game, I'm really just playing the only moves to find, that I think I can maybe survive. Let's see how things progressed. Knight e5, queen c3, bishop g7, all of his pieces are coming to the game. Now knight c5. So I have a threat, knight takes d7, but he can just simply sidestep it with king e8. And now notice, not only I've stolen another pawn, but I've also given him the opportunity to open another file, the c file, with something like rook c8 and rook down. So really now all of black's pieces have the potential to come into the game. In this position, I played, again, I was just playing the moves that I felt were the only moves. And it seems like it was the only move. I played d4. which I think Yermolinsky probably didn't anticipate, just because it seems a little bit illogical, because he has knight c2, either now or at some point. It's kind of funny. D4, it turns out that I played D4 twice in this game. It was both the only time I played good moves in the game. So we'll see a later D4 as well. So this is a very complicated position, and even though Black has so much more time, it seems it's very hard for him to do something concrete. So maybe an improvement over what he did would have been to play knight c6, and I think knight b3 is enforced, knight c2, and then to take the queen, and then to take the rook. We looked at a position like this, I believe. And Yermolinsky even suggested doing something a little bit wacky like this. And very hard to judge the position. I think White's better, but it's very hard to judge the position. I mean, his rooks have open files, and I still have to invest some time in getting my pieces out. I don't know what to think about this piece. But maybe that would have been improved. As it was, he played a very natural move. It seemed like, I think from his perspective, that he was going to be winning. He played knight c2, and I played king d1. Now the point is, if I play king d2, then he can simply just take the rook, because then after queen takes queen, knight c4, I'm in trouble. King c3, knight a5, clearly he's winning. Because now my king's out, and there's going to be no way for me to easily trap his knight on a1. So I can't make the natural move, king to d2, and I have to play king d1. This is a little bit scary, because later, of course, this bishop is going to come to the light squares, and my king on d1 is going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. So queen takes queen, pawn takes, knight takes, pawn takes. All this seems forced. Now, Black's next move is forced as well. He has to play rook d8 immediately. If he plays bishop takes e5, that'll give me time to consolidate the position with bishop b2, and then I can win the knight. So he plays the correct rook d8 first, and now bishop b2 would lose, because of bishop a4, king c1, rook d1. So even though the queens are off, we'll find that Black still has a lot of attacking resources here. So I have to play bishop d2. He takes the pawn, and I play king c1. Now, during the game, this was very complicated, and I didn't really know. I felt maybe I was better, but really it was impossible to say. I was expecting maybe a move like bishop d6, but I wasn't too worried about bishop d6, just on the basis that his bishop's nice on that diagonal there. And by moving it, he gives me a chance to play either knight d3 or knight ge4, both of which looked reasonable. As it was, he played an incredible move. And this is the kind of move that I don't think you can understand by using computer analysis. He played rook f8, which was just a stunning move. Now, the point that I'd like to make about the computers is that the computer would reject a move like rook f8 out of hand. But it's important to realize that chess is a practical game, and there's no absolute truth, or at least the way that oftentimes you could think a computer would present it as an absolute truth. Rook f8 is a very natural, practical attempt, which just has incredible potential. But really, when you look at it closely, it's a bluff that actually worked. So rook f8, he's bringing his last piece into the game. It isn't working, and he's threatening my f2 pawn. At the same time, however, he's allowing this knight to come into e6. And in fact, that's what I should have played. But the interesting thing about a bluff in chess is you can imagine a situation where both players are getting slightly low on time. Black thinks about rook f8 for a long time, and then plays it. And of course, I didn't expect rook f8. I just thought it wouldn't work at all. And then White has to then convince himself to play knight e6, when it looks like Black can. There's various ways not just one way, but various ways in which black can gain activity. He can take on e6 and then play a move like rook f6 or rook d6, or he can play rook f6 right away. And to tell you the truth, I think I was guilty of seeing ghosts at this point. I thought, well, he's thought so long on this move, he's got to have some kind of trick. And as it turns out, the move I played turns out to be correct, but it allows for the situation to become a little bit more frightening for me. I played knight d3. So from the computer standpoint, not a mistake, but from the practical standpoint, definitely a very dangerous move, because this is a little bit more passive, less forcing, and we'll see, I could have gotten into some real trouble, but I have kind of a miracle escape. He played bishop h8 just to get the bishop completely out of the way. King b2, and now a very nice move, b5. Now, at this point, first of all, if he is allowed to play b4 and pawn takes c3, I'm going to be in big trouble. So I have to come up with some kind of way to deal with this pawn push on the queen side, which all of a sudden is a very potent force. And here I actually saw all the way to the end of the game. Even though there was other variations he tried, I did see the one that he tried in the game, which was his most natural. But it could have been a lot more scary than as it was. But I have to take the knight. There's not much else I can do. And now b4. And here I boldly just took the pawn. So at first in the analysis, we looked at this a long time. It turns out, though, that white's probably winning. The scariest thing that black can maybe do here is play rook b8, threatening rook takes b4. And, for example, if I play a move like knight d3, it actually turns out that I'm going to lose the game after a move like rook f5, when he's threatening, first of all, rook takes g5, and also a rook swing over to the queen side with either rook b5 or rook a5, both of which, depending on what I do, are going to be very potent threats. And it looks like white is actually lost in this position. But in this position, knight b4, instead of losing a tempo, it looks like I'm actually winning the game with knight a6. Now, of course, these things like this, you're never going to be able to totally see in a practical game. There's just no way. But knight a6 makes sense in the sense that I'm winning the tempo. But rook b8 in general, I didn't really take into too strong of consideration. So you could say I'm lucky that rook b8 didn't work. So I took the pawn, and then he played bishop f5. And here I was very happy because I saw the kind of study-like finish that we're going to get in the game. I played back knight d3. Bishop takes knight is forced. Otherwise, he can't make any progress. Pawn takes. Rook takes pawn. And now, I think he thought he was doing okay here, but he had missed one move. Now I play d4. It's a very aesthetically pleasing move, because now a couple of things are going on. First of all, I've blocked his main counterplay with the bishop on a long diagonal. Second, I've opened up my own bishop, and this bishop is working nicely with the knight on g5. For example, if rook takes d2, I have bishop b5. And king f8 loses to knight e6. And on rook e6, I think white has a choice. He could play either knight e4, knight c5, or maybe even knight e6 with the intention of playing rook f1 and rook f8 mate. So, after d4, Yermolinsky actually resigned. It was maybe a little bit premature, but in a way it was nice, because d4 was, by white, is such an aesthetically pleasing move, and all of a sudden white's pieces are all going to be coordinated. If black plays rook b8, white has knight e4. So, the only thing, I guess, in summary, I'd like to stress about this game is that in a game with these wild complications, I think what happens a lot of times in the analysis of those games is that people come to conclusions about what they see as the truth of the position. But in fact, in the real game, there is no real truth. It's just you don't know what's going on during the game. Black didn't know what was going on, and white didn't know what was going on. And instead of it being something where you can have an overview of the total game, like you do in the analysis session, really all you get during the game is you have little points in time where you have to make decisions. For example, when I played d4 the first time, that was really my only move that I saw where I was at least surviving. Everything else I'm losing. Or when I played queen takes f7, which was the novelty of the game, that seemed to me like an only move, because if I don't do that, I don't see what I have at all. So it's like I'm grabbing something just to hopefully get something later on in the game. Also, the funny thing is, you have to realize from a psychological perspective, is that I got a position where I was down about 3 million tempos, and I had already played Yermo in a variation similar to this, where I also had got down on time. And that game got published in the New York Times, so I was completely traumatized by the whole situation. So there was also that added psychological element, which is important. From an objective standpoint, I think what you could say is that a lot of times we get positions like this and we can think that they're simply lost because so many prior examples of games by people like Tall and Fisher are beautiful games where they're winning due to their development advantage. A lot of other games, though, have gone kind of unnoticed, like the games of Korchnoi in particular, who is willing to take material and then play a defense, an active defense, and survive in these kind of miraculous ways. And those games, maybe we should be a little bit more aware in these kinds of positions that sometimes the development advantage isn't all it's cracked up to be over the material. But, to be honest with you, I'm still on this side of the old school which says that the development should win. And in fact, I have a feeling, I have a feeling that if we look further enough at this game, at some point we should find at least something where Black can use his initiative to at least have a better, maybe, at least equality, maybe a better position. But those are my prejudices. Anyways, this is International Master Jesse Kraai, hoping you've enjoyed this very complicated struggle against Grandmaster Alexander Yermolinsky. Bye-bye.